wonderful panelists this morning. We're going to start with a conversation that actually was alluded to during the closing plenary last night. The electrification of everything, or maybe almost everything. And we have a really wonderful set of panelists here to discuss this. We have Jay Griffin. He is the commissioner, one of the commissioners with the Hawaii Public Utility Commission. My friend, Commissioner David Hochschild, I'm sorry, I keep mispronouncing his name, but he is the guy. And Shelley Kimura, and she is the Senior Vice President with Business Development and Strategic Planning for Hawaiian Electric Company. Commissioner, I would love to start with you, Commissioner Hochschild. And you alluded to the electrification of almost everything last night, and California has absolutely set in place a framework for doing that. So in the context of California, what does that mean? Like, what loads are you looking to electrify, and how quickly?
Yeah, I said almost everything. Can you hear me okay? Is this on? Yeah. I said almost everything, but I do think aviation and shipping will be the very last to go, but the low-hanging fruit right now starts with electric vehicles. So in California, we have just established a new statewide goal of 5 million electric vehicles by 2030. And last week, we passed the 400,000 mark. So we're 402,000 on the roads today. We're adding about 12,000 electric vehicles a month. And we've also set a target of 250,000 electric vehicle chargers by 2025. That infrastructure is critical. But along with that, I'm actually very excited about the potential of electric heat pumps to displace natural gas-fired water heaters, and we're seeing some momentum there. And then the electrification of rail. We have a diesel rail line that connects San Francisco to Silicon Valley. That's being converted to electric, and we're building high-speed rail in California. We spent $3 billion on that already. And the commitment's been made that will be a fully electric system powered 100% with renewables.
We're going to get into transportation quite extensively in a moment, but I just learned something about Hawaii and the electrification of certain building functions. I'm wondering, so you mentioned the heat pumps and so forth. Tell me what's going on in Hawaii that could be beneficial to other states, but both Jay and Shelley. I'll start with Jay.
Sure. When we were talking about this, one of the things that we noted is that we actually have a very high rate of electrification already. And so I think our focus more on how can we make those existing loads, facilitate more controllable loads, flexible loads, and help them really integrate the other types of renewables into the system and better match the renewable energy supply versus just kind of switching between different types of fuels.
And obviously that happened because you don't have, like, where I live in New Jersey, like natural gas pipelines everywhere. But what allowed that electrification to happen? Give us some context. What did you have in place, or was it just naturally part of where you evolved to?
I think it's just a natural part of how the economy and the population evolved in Hawaii. The natural gas infrastructure is not as robust as it is on the mainland, and so a lot of buildings are already electric. There's some CHP out there, but for the most part, we're looking at how to use buildings and building management systems, and through our demand response program, which is top of mind right now because we have an RFP out and we're expecting bids back. But we are leveraging aggregators, demand response aggregators, to help us aggregate all of the different end uses, whether it's buildings or homes or whatever it may be, to provide our system operators grid services. So it creates more opportunities for those flexible loads.
Just to build on that, I think we are changing the sort of natural order of how energy has worked for a long time. It used to be that, electric demand drives power generation. You turn on a factory and someone has to fire up a power plant, and there's going to be some subset of that load that switches, and actually renewable generation is going to drive electric demand. We can be flexible particularly as you get longer and longer range electric vehicles, when you charge and when you heat water and when you cool buildings. And we need to be pushing these smart devices, as Jay mentioned, as much as possible. And that means, for example, with rooftop solar, as another example, you don't want dumb solar, you want smart solar, which means you have to have telemetry and voltage regulation and those things that can contribute to grid stability, because every single one of these devices and technologies has to be a good citizen of the grid. And I think actually if you do that right, actually the more you electrify, the more stable the grid becomes. There's more levers at your disposal.
Thought you were going to jump in on that, sorry.
Well, I'm in complete agreement. I think that's a lot of, if you look at some of the thinking behind the new Smart Export program, both in how that's managing the solar system, but the types of incentives it provides for shifting and managing load to coincide with when the generation's available. So something that, I think we've been in the lead in here in Hawaii and continuing to learn lessons.
So here in Hawaii, the mayors have all committed to this clean transportation ideal. There's different things happening now behind the scenes to start enabling that. Shelley, your company just filed a big, I don't know what you call it, a plan, a roadmap for electric vehicles. So can you give us a sense of, what the so where are you focusing in the near term, right? And why? Why is that the focus?
Yeah, thank you for asking that and recognizing the plan we filed. And it's actually more than just electric vehicles. We look at electric transportation, so it includes vehicles, it includes airports and ports, and rail is also part of the entire portfolio. So it's more than just light-duty vehicles and passenger vehicles. I think the why question is probably the more important question, and then I can go into the near term. I think for us, it's a really significant priority because there's huge opportunities with the synergies between electrifying transportation and moving electricity to 100% renewables. So as we go down this path of 100% RPS, electric transportation will actually help us get there. And as we get there, will help clean transportation. So there's a really nice symbiotic relationship there. When we started doing our roadmap, one of the first things we asked ourselves is how is this going to contribute to that path, and test our hypothesis on that. So one thing is that it's going to reduce the price of electricity for all customers, because as you increase the sales, that in our decoupled regulatory model, that actually reduces the price for all customers. You're spreading, fixed costs or fixed revenues over more kilowatt-hour sales. So while some people think we have an interest in doing it to increase sales and increase revenues, that's not part of the equation for us in Hawaii. The other thing is that as we can get electric vehicles to be charged during the day, or electric transportation to be charged during the day when solar energy is abundant, that actually helps us integrate more solar as well. And then as we were talking about demand response, it creates more end uses for demand response, which also helps us. As we have more variable generation, we need demand to start following generation.
Yeah. Go ahead, yes, Jay.
Yeah, I'd just like to follow up on a couple of things. When I look at this, particularly a lot of the policy interest, the focus on clean transportation, particularly electrification, is the natural evolution of our clean energy policies and our climate policies. We have opportunities now with the abundance of renewable sources, particularly lower cost, to now fuel and displace oil in the transportation sector. So 10 years ago, the lesser known part of the clean energy initiative were all the transportation goals, which I think in Dawn's presentation yesterday, she's shown how we've fallen far short. When I look at where we stand now, I think we are poised to make significant progress in the next 10 years because of the new types of vehicles and technologies available. But there has been a very significant shift in the thinking, and I think the leadership from the utilities. When I started at the commission, I think there was very reluctance when we brought up this topic, and I think that has changed. And just as a, wanted to have one piece of news here. The commission has taken, we'll be filing or issuing an order, I believe later today or tomorrow, taking some further procedural steps with the plans that the companies have put forward. And for now, we're asking for comments from the public, particularly focused on what people see as near-term priorities for the plans. And we would expect that companies will keep coming forward with some of the pilots and new proposals. And maybe as we go further, I can add some of my perspectives on what I've seen so far and some ideas there.
Okay. And one of the things that you've all sort of implied is that this goes hand in hand with the distributed grid, if you will. So what, I'm curious about a couple things. Number one is, what's missing from the grid right now that will help this happen? Like, and how do we get there? Because it seems like there's a lot of smart automation technology that's needed to help kind of balance these loads. How do you prioritize these loads? Like, how do you decide that these cars are going to get this chart? How do you get to a place where it's automating and prioritizing loads the way the people want it to be, and not necessarily when someone happens to plug in and it's convenient for that person? I mean, what's the thought on that prioritization?
So hopefully this answers your question. We can ask a follow-up. But so we've been looking at a distributed grid for a long time, and in our planning processes, we've had to evolve to account for that. And more and more, we're trying to account for what customer choices are and what customer behaviors will be. And that's a very different equation in our long-term planning. And so electric vehicles is one more addition to that. So we spent a lot of time looking at what the forecast for electric vehicles could be and where they could be. And so that's part of our planning process to determine what the upgrades on distribution needs to be, what the generating capabilities need to be.
How are the new, go ahead.
Well, just to add to that, I think that you're, over time, going to change what hours of the day you want people to conserve energy or not. Obviously, in California, we've seen a huge shift in the last 10 years. It used to be the middle of the day was the peak, and they want everyone to conserve. Now we have this huge glut of surplus solar at the middle of the day. And I think what we need to do is insist that every device that's connecting to the grid, whether it's an electric heat pump or an EV, has telemetry and voltage regulation where you can control and help guide that load in a way that supports the grid. And so that's the main push right now, is to insist on smart capabilities. The other point I want to make, just right now, the things that we can do that will be very significant around new construction. So one of the things we just did is we adopted, we have codes that require homes to be EV ready, which means a dedicated 240 volt circuit and a conduit run. We're not requiring the wire, we're not requiring the EV charger, but we're requiring that so you don't have to then have the added expense of adding a new electric panel that's larger in size when you get an EV. You want to make it, and we just did the same thing for electric heat pumps. Again, dedicated circuit with the conduit, so that it makes it, probably saves $1,500 on the cost of that installation when you get to that point. And so just making the prospect of switching as friction-free as you can possibly make it, I think, is really important too.
How can Hawaii move to support that?
I would add, it's not necessarily what's missing from the grid. I would say it's more what's missing from the marketplace presently. Because I think where these are going to come together, or where it's emerging, I mean, it really comes down to the types of price signals customers get, right, when they're going to charge, when they would rather prefer to store energy, and the types of programs they can participate in. I mean, these are all the things that we've been working on and evolving. And I think, we're catching up to where we need to be, and all of those options that'll be available as we see greater customer adoption. So I think, from what I've seen, the technology is ready to be out there, but we're poised for lots of uptake, and these are all the things that we're working on.
And I would just add, what I said yesterday, I feel very strongly, you don't need to be a big state to make a big difference. Hawaii is pioneering models that everyone is watching. We're watching very closely in California. I mean, obviously, as an island in the middle of the ocean, you don't have the benefit of being able to rely on generation from other states. And if you can, I mean, getting to 100% renewables and setting that as the goal was a very significant feat. And, you know, we're wishing you all the success, because if you can do it, I think any state can do it.
How have been,
this concept of an integrated grid, and we've been talking about this over the last day or so, but we're all trying to figure it out together. The entire industry is trying to figure that out together. And so this idea of trying things and experimentation and starting small, managing risk, and then learning from that. So we're not going to have all the answers up front, but some of these things we're moving ahead and seeing now, how is this going to work, and let's adjust from there, along with the advancement of technologies, because that's just going to continue to evolve. The business models in the market will continue to evolve. And so how we plan for our grid needs to account for that. And so that's all part, those kinds of concepts are part of the grid modernization strategy that we recently filed. And actually, credit to many others in our company that they just got an award from SEPA for that.
I just want to follow on what Shelley said there. This topic area in itself is one that has a ton of complexity, a lot of uncertainty about what will happen in the future, and we face that with almost every one of these topics we deal with in Hawaii, being on the leading edge. One of my experiences dealing with this is, I mean, to the extent that we can do exactly what Shelley's talking about, how do we basically continue, I mean, try new programs, pilots, learn by doing, is a better way to de-risk how we tackle and address that, rather than we've had a couple experiences where we tended to just continue to ask questions about what may happen, worry about if we get things wrong. I think our perspective as decision makers has evolved to, how do we just continue? I mean, we're going to keep trying. We're going to learn. There's going to be some failures. I appreciated what I heard Josh say yesterday about, when we do get things wrong, please write a letter to the editor in support. Because I think we're gonna move faster and more flexibly with that approach, rather than trying to solve the big picture puzzle every time, because the picture's too big and complex.
we're going to go to sidebar in a moment, but I want to ask one other question before that, and that is, we were just chatting backstage about the charging infrastructure, and you just alluded to the you know, making sure that certain buildings are charging ready, and we know that it's a chicken and egg thing. The charging infrastructure is there. People are, the more it's there, in multi-residential buildings, multi-use buildings, and in places where, you know, people don't, you know, frankly might not have as much money as others. All behind all that, as the loads kind of move around, you got a surplus in the middle of the day. What role does energy storage play in this, right? We don't really have, I haven't heard so much about policies here in Hawaii for energy storage, but what role will energy storage need to play in this electrification of everything? I'm going to start with you, Shelley.
Sure. So storage has a much bigger role in our total portfolio. So we're going to have storage no matter what as we move to 100% RPS. As part of our electric transportation strategy, we're trying to create opportunities for workplace charging, because it's really important to get people to charge during the day, and that will be the lowest cost option, and that alleviates some of the need for more expensive storage. So to the extent we can minimize the amount of storage we have, we want to try and do that through when people actually charge. The other thing we talked about backstage was some of these superchargers and how that's going to impact the grid. So storage will be needed in those cases to help mitigate the impact on the grid. In Hawaii, we want to try and encourage people to be charging at work where the car is going to be sitting. So you don't necessarily need as many of these superchargers that will have greater impacts and then therefore greater cost on the grid. But we do recognize that the market will start to demand that as well.
So I think the energy storage industry is kind of where the solar industry was 10 years ago. I think the future is very bright. They got a lot more cost reduction ahead of them. But you look where's solar today? It's the dominant source of new electric generation in the world. And this next few months, we're going to hit 1 million solar rooftops in California. It's really, truly has arrived. And I think one benefit, by the way, of storage is that it is riding the cost reduction curve that EVs are helping, but you're kind of piggybacking what laptop computers, and so when you're all on the lithium-ion train, you get the benefit of that. I think for California, where it's a little different with Hawaii, we have a storage mandate, 1.3 gigawatts by 2020, but to some extent, we're also working on regionalization, and if we have a regional electric grid, that serves as a form of storage, because we can share our surplus renewable generation when we need to and make use of other states. So storage and regionalization are sort of different ways to achieve the same goal. Let me one final point. We were talking about the ultra-fast charging, and I was mentioning some news that's recent, which is Electrify America, which is the entity formed after the VW settlement. They have just developed the fastest charger on the market. So it's through UL, it does 20 miles of charge in 1 minute, 200 miles of charge in 10 minutes, right? Which is not so different than going to a gas station. And that's the kind of thing that's a big hit to the grid, because it's a 350 kW charger, but that you could see paired with storage so that the impact of the grid is not so great, and that would, I think, really help facilitate faster deployment of electric vehicles.
I'll just add, I mean, if you look at the numbers, actually, historically, we've been a leader in kind of per capita levels of storage. It's been initially driven by interconnection renewable projects, moved into, I mean, more broadly into just the needs because of the time of day when energy is available. But we've also seen it moved into the distributed side. My look on things, I think we have the highest proportion of customer-sited rooftop systems with storage. I mean, the proportion is far ahead of anyone else. So that market is starting to see the beginning side of its takeoff. So we are just at the beginning of this. I mean, we're going to see lots of other forms as well as thermal storage, there's other type of medium out there. So, I mean, it will be a big part of our future here, and already is.
Excellent, excellent, not just batteries. Elaine, a question from the sidebar.
Yeah, we've been getting really good questions on Twitter. One that's really relevant to what you just said, Jay, is I guess the question is, what are your views on the risks of electrification related to resilience? Is distributed energy resources really the answer? Resilience and electrification.
To me or the group or?
Anyone, yeah.
The group.
Go.
Well, there's a few angles to this. It's a great question. I mean, think of this as an island. I mean, the resilience of our systems, period, is, think of a hurricane, think of a natural disaster, think of what's already going on the Big Island. Our existing system's highly vulnerable to those kinds of events. So the ability to fuel ourselves with electricity produced here, not just to have electricity, but to fuel our transportation systems, I mean, that seems to me a much more resilient system than the one that we have today. And and that's where we're headed. Yeah,
thunderous agreement. I think the more you electrify and the more distributed the system becomes, the more reliable and resilient it becomes. And also, just to make the larger point, reducing our reliance on oil makes us safer as a world. I mean, how much blood and treasure has America lost fighting in wars where oil was a factor? I do think, system-wide, it is better to be more reliant on renewables and to be more distributed. Yep.
Yeah, and so just to put an exclamation point on that, I think, one of the things people need to recognize is that for gasoline, all of that needs to get shipped in, and we're in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. So, just emphasizing what Jay was saying, we're islands. And so no matter what, we're in a really precarious situation. And if you're gonna have a tsunami or anything like that, the ports are gonna get shut down. And being able to bring in all that petroleum is gonna be difficult.
One lightning round question with the minute left is, how do we make this equitable? How do we do this in a way that it's not going to penalize certain communities and and pull everyone, pull and inspire everyone? Jay.
Mindset, more opportunity, meaning let's focus on what are the new types of programs, new options that a broader set of the community can participate in, whether it's electric buses that, all types of citizens ride, community solar, something that we've been working on here for quite a while. Lots of things that we have working on now, but continue to.
I think pathways for jobs in the infrastructure is a huge amount of infrastructure that needs to be built out to support electric vehicles and all the rest of it, and having programs targeted at disadvantaged communities for those resources are really important, as are having additional incentives for lower income participants to be able to get higher incentives to adopt electric vehicles, and particularly with mass transit. Electric buses, I think, are particularly important.
And Shelley, one quick response.
So fundamental to that is rate design, but if we're speaking specifically about transportation, that was the design of what we did in our roadmap so that it benefits everybody. And we're also focused on public charging infrastructure that everybody can access, multi-unit dwellings as well, and workplace charging. So all of that gives access to more people. We're also focused on transit. So electric buses creates access to all, as well as car sharing.
Great. So thank you. Thank you to Shelley Kimura, David Hochschild, and Jay Griffin. Thank you. Thank you.